As the Allies fought deeper into Germany in the final months of the Second World War, they came across true hell on earth. Concentration camp after concentration camp was liberated, and within these barbed wire fences, they discovered death and depravity caused by a regime in retreat and on the brink of defeat. Within sites such as Buchenwald and Bergen-Belsen, corpses lay everywhere, and there was no effort to deal with the prisoners' bodies. Some SS guards who had caused a huge amount of the suffering did remain to try and keep law and order, but these were then arrested. Inside of Dachau, there was a huge amount of anger within the liberating forces at the state that their enemies had left the camp in. With this, some American soldiers sought to take their own revenge, as did the prisoners who inflicted instant vengeance upon their former captors. This resulted in what was known as the Dachau Liberation Reprisals, in which surrendering German soldiers were massacred inside the earliest concentration camp that was opened. Many of those who witnessed these events later documented what they saw, and it was more horrific than you can probably imagine. Today we look at this, and to support, please make sure to subscribe. The evacuation of Dachau had begun a few days before the liberation of the camp, and those who were left in charge at the site were under instructions to keep order within the prisoner population. Prisoners were starving and suffering, and the man in charge of the handover of Dachau was Untersturmführer Heinrich Wicker, a young but experienced SS man. The surrender of Dachau to begin with was handled relatively well, but as American soldiers approached the complex, they found terrible scenes. Soldiers of the 3rd Battalion 157th Infantry Regiment, 45th Infantry Division, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Felix L. Sparks, discovered 39 railway boxcars left on the tracks parked up. When they opened them up, they found around 2,000 skeletal corpses just lying inside. Some of them had been massacred, and there was even brain tissue found on the ground, indicating one prisoner had been beaten to death. The sight of this made many of the US soldiers sick, and some even wept at the horrors of what they found. The camp had been left in a terrible state. As the Second World War was coming to an end, the number of prisoners at Dachau rose heavily, and conditions began to deteriorate quickly. The Germans began moving large numbers of inmates from other camps closer to the front lines, and people were sent to Dachau, which was incidentally the first camp opened inside the Third Reich. This constant overcrowding caused prisoners to have nowhere to sleep, and it's estimated that over 15,000 people died from disease and starvation, but also execution. Prisoners continued to arrive at the site even days before the camp was liberated, and it had been told to the guards by head of the SS Heinrich Himmler that no prisoner shall be allowed to fall into the hands of the enemy alive. With this, a death march of around 7,000 was sent away from the camp, and many who could not keep up were executed. Even a mass grave of around 1,000 prisoners of Dachau was discovered. As the Americans entered Dachau's complex and the prisoner area itself, the soldiers found even more bodies and corpses. Many had been dead for hours and days, and some lay literally where they'd succumbed to their fate. Inside different bunkers, hundreds of barely clothed corpses were found, and others were piled in rooms from floor to ceiling. It was said that, I quote, "the stench of death was overpowering." With these discoveries, it is easy to see why the US forces felt a huge amount of anger towards their enemies, the SS men, who had inflicted such cruelty, and some who still remained at Dachau. Sparks was informed that there was around 100 SS guards in the camp who did have their arms with them. Now when Dwight Eisenhower, the Supreme Allied Commander, told the world of the capture of Dachau, he claimed that, I quote, 300 SS camp guards were quickly neutralized. It has been said of the time that the Americans entered that, at noon on Sunday the camp was quiet, and the SS guards were at their posts in the towers when the cry "Americans" went up. A prisoner rushed towards a gate, and a guard shot him. Outside, a single American soldier stood looking casually at the towers, while the guards eyed him, and others, who were 200 or 300 yards away. When the Americans opened fire, the guards in the gate tower came down, hands in the air. One held a pistol behind his back, and the first American shot him. Soldiers who indicated that they had surrendered were being shot instead of being taken prisoner of war, and more reprisal shooting would take place. The most infamous incident involved around 50 German prisoners who had been captured and who had surrendered. They'd been left inside of a confined area which was walled off, and coal had been stored there. The wall was an L shape and roughly 8 feet high. Lieutenant Colonel Sparks left these SS men to be guarded by an American machine gun team, and as he left the area, he heard a shout of, "They're trying to get away," and then the sound of machine guns firing. The result of this was around 12, possibly more SS prisoners being shot dead. The gunner was crying hysterically. Other witnesses at the time claimed that they saw around 15 to 16 dead in the Coalyard in front of the machine gun team. Sparks later recounted about this incident that, I quote, "It was the foregoing incident which has given rise to wild claims in various publications that most or all of the German prisoners captured at Dachau were executed. Nothing could be further from the truth. The total number of German guards killed at Dachau during that day most certainly did not exceed 50, with 30 probably being a more accurate figure. The regimental records for that date indicate that over 1,000 German prisoners were brought to the regimental collecting point. Since my task force was leading the regimental attack, almost all the prisoners were taken by the task force, including several hundred from Dachau." He tried to play down what had truly happened inside the camp. But this was not the only set of reprisal killings. Near to one of the watchtowers, specifically Watchtower B, there were many SS guards who had been shot and executed by US forces. It's not known for certain if these had surrendered or not. It was claimed that these men who were shot did not submit easily. It's believed these had been involved in a possible shootout with the liberating forces. Regarding this, it was said that 17 were shot at Tower B, and a few more were killed by the US soldiers. Anywhere from 25 to 50 were also killed by the inmates. Some of the prisoners sought vengeance, and they wanted to put some of the people who had kept them in terror conditions to the sword. One witness claimed that, and I quote, "Prisoners caught the SS men. The first SS man elbowed 1 or 2 prisoners out of the way, but the courage of the prisoners mounted. They knocked them down, and nobody could see whether they were stomped or what, but they were killed." Killed also were prisoner functionaries or carpos, those inmates who had been given a significant degree of power to wield over the other inmates. Specifically, one American soldier also brought it upon himself to inflict some vengeance with his own weapons. Commander of I Company, Lieutenant William Walsh, entered one of the railway boxcars and found 4 Germans who had surrendered to him. A private climbed into the box with him, and then Walsh or the private shot the Germans in the head, giving them a coup de grace gunshot. Some of the guards were also held in a separate part of the camp, and these were also executed. The American soldiers did tend to turn a blind eye to the actions of the prisoners who attacked the guards, and they saw them beating one German guard to death with a shovel, and this was ignored, and it was said of this that there wasn't much left of this specific guard after. There was little punishment ever brought for what happened inside of Dachau, and the US military, despite their investigation, claimed that there was a violation of international law. However, they said, I quote, "In light of the conditions which greeted the eyes of the first combat troops to reach Dachau, it's not believed that justice of equity demand that a difficult and perhaps impossible task of fixing individual responsibility can now be undertaken." What this meant was that it was understandable the anger the American liberators had in their hearts and minds, and that a few SS guards being shot was little price to pay in the eyes of the Americans. They were the enemy after all, and they were the ones who had caused so much terror. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.